Welcome to the Giving Town podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Roberts, and my goal is to share stories of hope and generosity in a wonderful community of Newberg and the surrounding area. This podcast is sponsored by my real estate team, the Joyful Roberts Group. We are licensed brokers here in town with Premier Property Group, LLC. If you're considering making a move or selling your home, I'd be more than happy to walk you through the process of buying or selling your home. So in today's episode, I'm interviewing Sean Andries, who is the executive director of the Chehalem Cultural Center. We discussed what a cultural center is, why it's important to our town, future plans, and a lot of great stuff in between. So I hope you enjoy this episode. Thank you, Sean, for joining me today. I'm looking forward to getting the word out a little bit more about the Cultural Center. So if you're in Newberg, you probably have heard of the Cultural Center, but today we're going to be talking a little bit more in depth, and maybe you'll learn some things that you didn't know before.
It was my pleasure to be here. Thank you for joining me here at the Cultural Center in our historic old theater that we hope to make a historic new theater sometime very soon.
Exactly, yeah. So for those listening, we are on the second level of the Cultural Center. And if you've never been up here, it is basically kind of the beginning stages of what looks like a construction site. Lots of chairs and things piled around, but before too long, this is going to be a beautiful new theater. And we'll be talking a bit about that today. So the first thing that I'm going to ask, and it is a question that maybe you haven't been asked directly before, and that if you're in Newberg, maybe you haven't thought about, but we've kind of been used to having, unless you've been here a really long time, but we've been used to having a cultural center with so many different things that it does. But could you share, what is a cultural center?
That is surprisingly a question I don't get asked very often. It's a really fascinating and interesting question to me. I think that those of us who are newer to Newberg kind of can't imagine what it's like around here if we wouldn't have a place like the Chehalem Cultural Center here. But I was talking with someone recently who's been in the community for a long time, and they said to me, I can remember when we didn't have something like the Cultural Center, and they were telling me what it meant to them in their experience of community to have a place like this. And to answer your question as directly as I can, a cultural center is really just a place for community to come together and to interact and share experiences. And my experience, from my perspective, culture, community is what exists between individuals. It's the shared things we do together, the history we have together, the conversations we share. So a cultural center is really just a place to prompt those interactions and a place to host those kinds of events that would do things. Lots of communities across the state, across the country, have cultural centers. There's a really wonderful cultural center I love down in Lincoln City. There's one up in Hood River that's really great. Lots of communities have one. And they mean a lot of different things to communities. And I think one of the things that sets this cultural center apart in this community is what a central fixture it can be in the life of this community. Communities like Newberg, rural communities, I've spent my whole life living and working in rural spaces, and they used to have like a Grange or some sort of other central town place. Like I went to clown school in a small town outside Arcata, Northern California, called Blue Lake, and it's a very old dead logging town, and it's about 1,100 people. They have, I think, 12 churches, native gaming casino, an old lumber mill, and this clown school. And once a month on Sunday morning after church gets out, everyone would come together and have pancakes. And it was kind of like the one place in town where everyone would have an excuse to interact and to kind of talk about what's going on. And places like Newberg used to have lots of those natural kind of watering holes, those pathways, places where people would cross paths. And so I see our role here at the Chehalem Cultural Center as very much being that cross paths for people in our community, that place where you might sit down at a concert next to someone who you maybe have no other excuse to ever meet, but who lives just a couple doors down from you, or you might, see someone in the gallery one day and strike up a conversation about something you see on the walls. And so I really see our function here as a cultural center as creating opportunities for people to get to know their neighbors and build community by, having things going on.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned you had spoken to an individual too who said he remembered what it was like, or he or she had remembered what it was like before the cultural center. So how did it come to be that we actually got this place to be what it is? Because it wasn't always a cultural center.
No, it was not. The building itself was first built in 1935 as part of the Hoover presidential administration's public works projects that were designed to get us up and out of the Great Depression. It was, I believe it's the third school that was actually built on this site. It was built in 35 as a school and kind of had some additions and changes over the years until the mid-90s when two things kind of happened. One, and I think the real reason the school was vacated is that, the needs of the community had outgrown the school. The needs of children going to school in 1994 was a lot different, maybe, than the needs of children going to school in 1935. So they had kind of outgrown the school and were building a new school across town. But then also there was a small earthquake in the area around the same time that got people really nervous about having all these kids inside this building surrounded by all this unreinforced masonry. So the school district left. They still own the building, and it kind of went into disrepair. The block went into kind of a state of blight. Barbed wire fencing went up. Windows were getting knocked out. And I think that the sense around town was that, like, wow, there's this beautiful brick building. We should find something great to do with it. And around 2000, 2005, there started being this real movement of really invested, energized community members who started coming together to talk about what could this wonderful old building, this place that had been the center of community for so long, what could it be for us now? And there were lots of ideas at the time. I think that they thought about moving City Hall here. They thought about doing some kind of social services out of this building. There was talk briefly about letting McMenamins do something with the space. But ultimately, this idea of a cultural center and something that was going to benefit for the community was what was settled on. And so the Chehalem Parks and Recreation Department kind of stepped in at that point, and they bought the property from the school district for $1 under the stipulation that it would remain in the public domain in some way. The building sat empty then for a number of years as this same group of people went about dreaming, envisioning what the space could be, and then ultimately fundraising. And then they had raised about $5 million to do the first set of renovations and opened in 2010 for the first time with our gallery spaces and our arts classrooms and our art studios. And that's kind of how the cultural center came to be.
Yeah, it's a cool story, and I had forgotten actually how recent it was and what the timeline was. And we'll talk some more about some of the future phases, because really the first phase one, was kind of level one in many ways, right? And then we're sitting up here in level two, which will be phase two. But we'll get to that later on in this episode. But you kind of touched on it in what you were saying before about what a cultural center does, what its purpose is. Well, what do you feel specifically for Newberg that the importance of the Chehalem Cultural Center is for our community?
Yeah, I think for me, that became very clear pretty early on. I remember kind of like during my first year, we had a theater company, Hispanic theater company, Latinx theater company out of Portland called Teatro Milagro come to town to do a touring show. And they did a bilingual show in our little black box theater. And we did a lot of outreach. It was a free show to bring community members in. And I remember sitting in the theater that night, and as the show was going on, and it was a funny show, and it was in English and in Spanish. And I remember the audience that night was about third native Spanish speakers and about 2/3 native English speakers. And I remember watching us all watch the same show together and thinking that this was a room full of people that for any other reason would never be a room full of people together, even though they all lived in the same area. And I remember watching as we all laughed at the same jokes and then laughed at different jokes and then laughed at each other because we were nervous that they were laughing at something we didn't understand. And there was a talk back that the actors in the show had with our audience afterwards. And it was just a really wonderful experience that for me showed the power of what art can do in a community. And it prompted conversations between people that had probably never spoken to each other before. And the power of art right in front of you to give you something to talk about that's not your money or your politics or your religion or any of the kind of things that can become really divisive really quickly. Like I'm not a fine arts. I don't have a fine arts degree. I don't know much about the art that comes in our gallery, but I have eyes, and you might not have any more education in art than me, but you have eyes too. And so we can have a conversation about what we see in the artwork in front of us. And I think that giving people an excuse to be together and then also giving them something to talk about outside of themselves is a really powerful way for people to discover a commonality with each other.
Yeah. Well, on that note, you mentioned you don't have a degree that maybe lends itself specifically to this, but you mentioned earlier that you'd gone to clown school. So what did your career path look like to where you now are overseeing the cultural center here?
Yeah. It really, in hindsight to me, seems like I had a lot of experiences that prepared me uniquely for this role in this community. I grew up in the Rogue Valley, and I was so very lucky that when we settled in the Rogue Valley when I was about 10, that it just so happened that we had the Oregon Shakespeare Festival next door. And to me, as a kid growing up in what is a pretty remote place, to have, without hyperbole, the world's greatest rural theater company right there, it seemed very normal to me to go and see a play a couple times a summer and a really high quality product. So my comfort level with the arts, particularly with theater from an early age, was very natural, and it felt like a place where I belonged. And if the Shakespeare Festival hadn't existed in the Rogue Valley, my upbringing would have been very different, and I probably wouldn't have gone to the University of Oregon to study theater. And theater is ultimately what I got my degree in. And I probably wouldn't have gone on to spend the next 10, 15 years of my life as a working actor and as a writer and a director in touring theater. I lived for a year in Kentucky working with a really wonderful theater company, the Actors Theater of Louisville, where I worked in all the kind of administrative parts of the office, but also on stage. And I think that was the first place I ever was like, oh, like this is a regular job for some people. And I went on to live and work in New York for a while, and ultimately came back to Oregon, where I was a working actor for a while. But then I, kind of slowly but surely started to realize that what I have to offer an ensemble isn't just as an artist. I went to school. I mentioned I went to clown school. I went to physical theater devising school. And devising is a form of playwriting where the actors are the performers, they are the writers, they are the directors, and you kind of just all come together to collectively write a play. And one of the things that happens in devising is everyone kind of naturally gravitates towards the roles that they can best lend the ensemble. And so in my career, I started to realize that one of the skills I brought to the table that other people might not bring us from the table is administrative. I was really good at booking spaces. I love fundraising. I love spreadsheets and organizing. And these are things that all artists love to do. So over that part of my career after I resettled in Portland, it just kind of was a very natural slide to me moving towards a more administrative role. And as I grew in that, I started to care very deeply that art happened and a little bit less about specifically what that art was. So I found myself wanting less to be the artist on stage, but more and more to make sure that those artists had a space and a platform. So I worked for a time for Body Vox, which is a dance company in Portland. I worked for the Portland Ballet, an administrative role. And then I think my first full-time job ever, actually, I was hired as program director for the Circus Project, which is a really cool circus school and nonprofit in Northwest Portland that I'm still very connected to. And I worked there for several years and really learned how to build a program and be administrator. And from there, I went on to be the operations manager at Portland Center Stage for a few years. And I really loved that job. It was really rewarding to work in a giant, big theater company like that. And I was very happy there. And then one day, I quite randomly came across this job posting for this Chehalem Cultural Center, which I had never been to. And I remember reading that job posting for the executive director and just thinking, they're talking about me. And I remember reading like everything that was bullet point on that job. And I was like, well, I have that. I do that. And I kind of had this moment of like, well, then maybe I should let them know that I'm what they're looking for. And I like put an application and had an interview. I came out here and met with some members of the board and the staff, and it just all made a lot of sense. And I remember leaving those interviews and not feeling like I had just been at a job, but feeling I had just like sat down with a group of people I really liked and just had an hour-long talk about like why art and community is important. And, and it's really just been a good fit ever since. And I have loved being here in Newberg, and I truly hope to be here at the Cultural Center for a very long time, because I don't think people realize what a great place Newberg is sometimes, and what a great place the Chehalem Cultural Center is. And there is truthfully nowhere else I would rather be. Nothing else I would rather be doing.
Well, and that's part of why I'm doing this podcast, is because I've kind of come to learn some of those same things. Like, it really is a special place. Yeah. And there's so many great things that I absolutely love that I get to uncover too. And how exciting for you to be doing essentially your dream job. It sounds like this is what you're really made for. And I think you'll be here a while, because I know we've got some work to do. And so before we get to that, which I am looking forward to talking about, what are some of the specific programs that you have here? Because I think some people come for one thing, but they may not know the whole scope of what is actually offered here at the Chehalem Cultural Center.
Yeah, we are a very broad organization. I think you're exactly right when you say that. There are a lot of people in Newberg, in Yamhill County, who haven't experienced the Cultural Center, or come here maybe for their weekly Rotary meeting, or they participate in our ceramics classes, or maybe they've rented space for their, an event they're hosting, birthday party or something, but don't really understand all of what we do. We have classes for kids, teens, and adults in ceramics, visual arts, theater arts. We have cooking classes. We also offer concerts and festivals and other sorts of performances year-round. We have a wonderful, beautiful ballroom that hosts so many weddings and quinceañeras and nonprofit dinners and retirement ceremonies and graduation ceremonies for the local universities. We also have a recording studio that people can set up their recording.
It's a really nice recording studio.
It is really nice, and it's very cheap to rent, and people it's this little hidden gem. And we have so many wonderful spaces here, and we have a wonderful staff that loves to help people make their cool thing happen. And we do a lot of our own programming. We have our concert series, we have our classes. We have a lot of programming that we build and design for the community in-house, and we love them to come and participate in it. But truly, one of the things we love most is when someone comes to us and says, hey, I've got a cool idea and a group of people that are excited about it. We just don't know how to make it happen. We don't have a place for it to happen. We don't have microphones or tables or chairs or whatever. We love when people come to us with that, because we're really good at administrative work. We're really good at selling tickets and setting up tables and chairs and scheduling. And just like I was talking before about how I discovered that I have an administrative skill set, like we have that as a staff, and we love to support other people in our community who get excited about events, because what goes on here at the Cultural Center is not all about us on staff, about us making cool programs that we think are neat. To us, it's just as important to help other people in the community celebrate the ways they want to. I think people probably don't know that, we're closed on Sundays, but the building is still very full. We currently have 2 churches that rent space kind of full-time in our ballroom and throughout the building, host their services on Sunday. We're often closed on Monday, but often on Monday nights. George Fox, during the school year, uses our ballroom to have art talks with all their students, or they have kind of like a series of like graduation preparation classes where they like get kids ready to go out. They get young adults ready to like go out and like fend for themselves in the world. The Cultural Center has a lot of different programming here and a lot of different ways to get involved. And if there's something you want to do that you don't see us doing, like, we'd love to hear about it, because maybe that's something we could be doing. We're a very broad organization. I think that's partially because of our place in this community. If I think about if the Cultural Center didn't exist in Newberg, where I would send my kids to get art classes or art summer camp, there's not a lot of options out there. So we try very hard to offer a wide variety of things. But if there's someone else in the community doing it already, we're not looking to duplicate or put them out of business. Great example is there's a wonderful program that the Yamhill Enrichment Society supports called the Junior Orchestra of Yamhill County. They teach music and orchestra classes at all of the grades at Edwards Elementary now, and like they do a great job of that. So we don't do that because, we don't need to compete over it. We just kind of see it as our role to make sure that there's great things happening all the time.
Yeah. There's so many different programs, and it's, as I've gotten more acquainted with the Cultural Center and I've kind of learned like, wow, how did I not know about this? Like, I was one of those people who I came in, whether it's in the ballroom or sometimes in one of the, like I saw the ceramic studio, but knowing that there's a Cultural Center and that there's the Black Box Theater that can have its own little performances, and even that there's an entire second level, like somehow not looking at the building did I realize like, oh, there's a whole second level just because it was closed. But let's talk about that. So kind of some of the future plans about where the Cultural Center is going, and there's some fundraising happening and some really exciting stuff. And we mentioned at the beginning that we're right now sitting in what's going to be the theater, the new theater. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So the building here, the old Central School, is probably about 45,000 square feet. When we first opened in 2010, they had renovated maybe a third of that space with the front lobbies and the gallery spaces, the classrooms, the 2 classrooms upstairs, and the studio spaces and the offices. And then in 2014, they added on the ballroom and the back lobby. And then in 2019, we finished the first floor by adding our culinary center, our cooking classroom, and a couple of bathrooms there. But we are looking at moving on to our next phase of construction, which will be our performing arts wing, which will include a redesign of our grand lobby and a big staircase to bring people up to the second floor. It will include this beautiful old LaJoy Theater, which we are going to turn into a wonderful 250-seat theater for music acts to tour through, for theater companies, dance acts, for local groups to get up on stage. And I think this is really the most important part about building this theater, is to build a wonderful place for people to see themselves on stage. We want to bring in great touring acts, but I think it's just as important to have Chehalem Valley Dance Academy do their Nutcracker here. For local, we have a couple of Aztec dance groups who practice regularly in our ballroom, for them to have a wonderful place to perform. It's important for community to see themselves on stage so that they can celebrate themselves and celebrate the people in their community. So we'll build the theater, and then there's going to be a dance and movement studio we'll build down the hall, which will be for dance classes, but will also be for things like yoga or Zumba or fitness classes, or we have a Tai Chi class that meets here regularly. And then we'll build some green room and kind of support spaces for the theater as well. And I think, with the movement studio along with the theater, the idea is not for us to become a dance school, not for us to become a theater company, but to bring things in from outside that we don't have around here, but then also to create a space for local companies, local performers to get up and get involved. I mentioned Chehalem Valley Dance Academy. It's not our idea to open our own dance academy and put them out of business. We want to build beautiful spaces that maybe they could have classes in, or maybe that they could offer classes that they can't currently offer because they don't have space for it. The Tai Chi class I was mentioning is not a cultural center class. It is somebody who does not work for the cultural center and rents space here to lead those Tai Chi classes, and they kind of do it all on their own. We just kind of provide the space for them. And so I think there's always a balance of our own internal programming and what we want to bring into the center from outside.
Yeah. Well, and thinking of some space, I mean, I'm trying to think of a public space where I guess pseudo's public space, but I mean, would you consider Cultural Center to be a public space? Is that?
I do, yeah. I do.
So, I mean, there's not really another public space that I can think of where you can fit 250 people in for a theater, or, you know, for a theater performance or something. And maybe I'm just not thinking of it, but I think that would open up a lot of opportunities, especially for someone that would want to come here and maybe the type of people that it could attract.
For sure. I think there are similar spaces, you know, like George Fox University has Bauman Hall, which is a wonderful place, about 700 seats, I think. The high school has a wonderful theater. The Gallery Theater down in McMinnville is really great. But all of those places are very busy doing their own programming.
Right.
And they're not really accessible if, like, you wanted to produce a play for you to rent it and do that. I think of a company like Penguin Productions, which does really great outdoor theater all summer long, just over on Ribbon Ridge there, just at the bottom of Ribbon Ridge. And they have nowhere to perform in the winter because they don't have their own theater space. And so creating a place that is available to the public for mixed-use purposes, I think, is really going to be awesome and important. We have a lot of stuff that happens here in our ballroom that would feel a lot better in a theater space. You think things like a TED Talk or even like when the Historical Society comes and they want to have a big event. There's just not a good publicly available place for that. Like, just a couple weeks ago, we had the Yamhill County Commissioners Candidate Forum that we had here in the ballroom. And, like, a ballroom is a nice place for that, but something like that forum would much more naturally fit on stage. And we love using our ballroom in lots of different creative ways, but it's never really a great theater.
Yeah.
The needs of a theater space are different.
Yeah. Where are we at in the timeline for this to all take place?
Oh, that's always a great question. I think that we are currently in our schematic design phase, which we have kind of big picture designs for the spaces up here, but now we're kind of nailing down on like just exactly where do, like, you know, air conditioning conduits go, what kind of lighting do we want in the space, what kind of, you know, all the detail-oriented stuff. That should finish up at the end of the summer, early fall, and at that point, we'll start going through the process of working with the city to get the correct permitting and all the land use that we need to. So hopefully, maybe next winter we'll break ground. Timing of construction's a big concern for us. We have so much activity that happens here in the summer with summer camps or all the weddings and events that happen in our ballroom that we really can't be under major construction during the summer. So we need to time it such that the big, most disruptive parts of our construction phase happen during our quieter months, December, January, February, as much as possible. So we're really hoping to really, truly in earnest be in construction next winter. When we started the project, our fundraising goal was $5 million, and I'm super excited to say that somehow we raised $5 million, which is a lot of money. The reality is that as the cost of everything in our lives go up, so does the cost of construction. So $5 million isn't going to go as far as it once did. So the need for ongoing fundraising activity continues, and will continue right up until we put the last nail in the wall, and then, you know, we'll probably have the next project coming along down the line.
Yeah. So what are some ways that people can get involved or support what's taking place here?
I mean, there are so many ways to get involved. We're always doing fundraising and stuff like that, but really, I think the best way to get involved is to volunteer. We always have opportunities to volunteer, whether it's at a concert or it's a gallery opening, serving wine, or if it's at, one of our festivals, taking surveys or welcoming people, or whether it's at summer camps, volunteering to work with the kids. We always have lots of opportunities to get involved with volunteering, and that's the best way to get involved. We do, of course, have ways that people can donate, or if they want to get involved as a donor or a funder. I always love having those conversations with people. But generating just like excitement and goodwill in the community is just as important as anything else we do here. The Cultural Center only exists because a group of people in this community got together and decided they wanted it to. And we only continue to exist because this community sees us as a value and continues to support us. We don't get general operating funding from the parks or from the city or from the state or any sort of like government mechanism. I think that's a common misconception, is that we're somehow like a branch of the city. No, we're our own nonprofit. We do all our own fundraising. We pay our own way. We have a wonderful relationship with Chehalem Parks and Recreation, who is our biggest supporter, who is our landlord, who owns this building, who takes care of this building. And that is no small thing, but, we very much only are able to do the classes we do, offer the concerts we do, make spaces available at the rates we can, because this community sees value in that and decides that they want to continue to make that a priority for them.
Yeah, well, I definitely am glad that the Cultural Center's here, and I can't really imagine. When I came to this town, it was right after it had opened, so I really never knew anything different. So it's really exciting to me, and really exciting for all the future things that are going to be happening. And I look forward to seeing how the community benefits as this place continues to grow. So thank you, Sean, for your time. It's been great getting to hear some of your thoughts and get to know your background a bit and hear more about the Cultural Center.
Yeah, I'm going to put one more plug in there,
Sure.
which is just to say that this building has so much history, and there's so many people in this community who went to school here, or their kids went to school here, or have some sort of history. One of my favorite things is when people come through the building and tell me about what it was like when this building was a part of their lives earlier on. So if you are out in the community and you feel like you want to stop by the Cultural Center and tell me about your experience or what it was like to go to school here, always stop at the front desk, ask for me. I always love to hear it. If you have old yearbooks or school memorabilia, we're always looking to catalog and kind of save and preserve that kind of stuff. So it's very much not only about the future, but it's also about preserving this kind of the history that is our building.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thank you, Sean.
Cheers.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode, and I hope you enjoyed learning more about the Cultural Center and how it is a great addition to our community. If you enjoyed today's episode, please hit the subscribe button to make sure you get each episode as it comes out. Also, if you support the mission of the Giving Town podcast, please consider leaving a 5-star rating, as that helps more and more people discover these episodes. Again, this podcast is sponsored by my real estate team, the Joyful Roberts Group, and we always work to give you an amazing experience buying or selling your home. Well, thank you again so much for tuning in, and I'll talk to you next time.